Welcome to episode 151 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories, their way, and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50, and your host for today's show. Today I'm speaking with Greg Peck. He is a retired journalist from Wisconsin whose life changed dramatically when his wife, Cheryl, was diagnosed with dementia. Greg spent years caring for her as the illness slowly took away the activities they once enjoyed together. After she passed away, Greg began rebuilding his life through bicycling, photography, and writing, which helped him process his grief and rediscover joy. Here are a few key takeaways from our conversation. First, Greg explained how caregiving shaped his marriage and required constant adaptation as Cheryl's abilities declined. Second, Greg described how bicycling, nature photography, and journaling became essential tools for stress relief, emotional processing, and healing. Finally, Greg shared how writing his weekly Substack reflections has allowed him to help others facing dementia, caregiving challenges, and widowhood. To tell us more about what he's doing today to give his life more meaning and purpose, please welcome Greg Peck to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Greg. I really appreciate it. Tell us a little bit about your life before you turned 50.
Okay. I grew up in a little town of Marshall in Dane County, Wisconsin. I can remember the population sign down the street when I was a kid. It read 736. So it was a very small town. I was a sports nut. Both my parents had grown up on farms, so I appreciated the farm life that my uncles had and worked with one of my uncles on my mom's side of the family on the farm as a teenager. My interest in sports kind of led me into journalism. I became a sports writer still in high school, and then I went to UW-Oshkosh, got a journalism degree in 1979, and I spent my whole career in newspaper journalism in Wisconsin. I started on Oconomowoc, one of the best weeklies in the state at that time, 7 years. Halfway through that 7 years, the news editor was retiring, and I ended up applying for that job and got the news editor job. So my whole career switched to the news side at that point. Didn't expect that to happen. I always envisioned myself as a sports writer or a sports editor. And then I went to Wisconsin Rapids for a couple of years, and then I came to Janesville, where I still live, and worked here 28 and a half years. I came as Sunday editor before they put the first Sunday edition out. And it was the flagship product of the whole corporation at the time. But as the newspaper industry has declined rapidly in recent years, is the Sunday paper and the Saturday paper both disappeared already. So
Really?
yeah, and the paper is just a shell of what it used to be. So
I bet you've seen a lot of changes in journalism over the last 28 years.
Yeah, it's been incredible. It has.
Yeah.
So
Are you still working in journalism?
No, I'm not working in journalism anymore. I had to retire early because of my wife, her illness, but that's how I ended up in Janesville.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about why you had to retire. What happened to your wife?
She got dementia. She was older than me, about almost 11 years older than me. And she got dementia. I could see it coming when she retired in 2009, I think it was. And it was coming on. And so she was diagnosed with mild cognitive disorder and probable Alzheimer's to come 10 years before she died. And she died just under 2 years ago now. So that was 2014 she was diagnosed. And I could actually see the writing on the wall before that. And so as she was working, she worked at the Janesville Gazette also as a newsroom clerk. And when we got married, she thought this isn't going to work with both of us working in the same newsroom. So she got a job at a seed corn company. And they treated her very well, and she was making almost as much money as I was making. My last job was opinion page editor of the Gazette, and I wrote editorials every day. So it was a very interesting position to be in at that time. And so she made good money, and since I could see what was happening, and we had applied for long-term care insurance, our financial advisor suggested it, but she failed the cognitive test at that time. So we couldn't get it. And I knew that it would be financially devastating if she ended up in memory care somewhere. And so we kept pushing more and more money into retirement funds. And then I was able to retire early. I was Actually, I was still 59 when I retired. I wanted to retire at 60, but our financial planner said we better work an extra year. And then we had property on Wisconsin River near Muscadet that I had planned to build a retirement home on. And I sold that, and we used the proceeds to do some repairs on the house, plus moved more money into our financial retirement assets. And then our planner said, you could retire right now. Essentially, I did that.
Well,
Because she was getting to the point where she didn't need around the clock care, but she was just forgetful about everything, and she was misplacing things. And so it got to be a burden that way.
was there any one thing that really stood out that kind of triggered you to say, we'd better get this checked out?
Yeah, I was noticing it, and I was telling Cheryl had 2 sons. It was a second marriage for both of us. And her younger son and his wife and our 2 grandkids, they didn't believe me that she was having that big of memory problems. They said, she just doesn't remember what you're telling her because it's really not that important to her. You're all excited about sports and stuff like that. And I said, no, it's more than that. And we booked a trip like a week up in Mercer, Wisconsin, in northern Wisconsin, a little fishing trip with the kids. And we got up there, and Cheryl's son Adam and I went fishing one day, and Cheryl and Jill, Adam's wife, took the grandkids into town to do some shopping. And there's a great big statue of a loon, because Mercer is like the loon capital of the world. And they stopped and took pictures at that on the way into town. They did some shopping, had lunch and whatever. Coming back past that, Cheryl sees the loon statue, and she goes, we should stop and take pictures there. The light bulb went on for Jill, and she thought, there really is a problem here. And so we had a really serious discussion about that outside the cabin that afternoon. And then she agreed that we needed to have her see a neurologist. And that's when we got the diagnosis.
Did she suspect it herself that there was a problem?
Cheryl was always in denial about it. And that was one of the big problems I ran into the whole time. She always tried to hide it, didn't want anybody to know it. But anybody who spent much time with us could detect it. But we never could talk about it. That was one of my biggest gripes, is that it was like the elephant in the room, that you couldn't talk about it because she just denied it. And that made it difficult.
I would imagine that would be a challenge to your relationship with something big like that going on, and one person denying it and refusing to get the treatment and not even wanting to talk about it.
Oh yeah, it was stressful. Little by little, as our life chipped away, we used to golf, and we gave up golfing. She was in a card club with her friends for 50 years, and eventually she couldn't play euchre anymore. We bowled for decades with a couple, and eventually she gave up bowling. She bowled in a women's league too with her friends, and couldn't do that anymore. We went for hikes, and then she didn't want to do that anymore. Eventually, we went bicycling a lot, and we had our dog Molly on the back of my bike on a basket. But eventually Cheryl got so, it wasn't that she wasn't balanced, but she just didn't know when it was time to stop. We'd go on like group rides, and one time she ran into the back of some people when we stopped. And so we had a bicycle built for 2, and so we started riding that exclusively. And the last year she was with me, the full year of 2022, we rode that bicycle with Molly on the back in the basket, like 415 miles throughout the season. When a neurologist diagnosed her, he gave me 3 goals. He said she needs to eat right, she needs daily exercise, and she needs socialization. Cheryl was Irish. She was only going to eat what she wanted to eat. I just tried to get her some healthy foods. Sometimes it got pretty repetitive, but I tried to get her out socializing all the time and tried to get her exercise without calling it exercise. So like bicycling with Molly, or taking Molly for walks, or for several years, we worked at Rotary Botanical Gardens here in Janesville. She started doing that with a friend before I retired, and that friend died suddenly just about the time that I retired. And so I said, if you want to continue that legacy you started, I'll volunteer with you. And that worked for a few years, and she'd be socializing with other people we volunteered with, and she'd be socializing with people who were touring the gardens. Cheryl was a very social person until late in the dementia cycle. So that helped. And also, like, we'd go to the farmer's market. You wander around the farmer's market, She'd stop and talk to all these people we knew, the vendors. Sometimes she'd just go on and on. I kind of have to pull her away from the vendor because the person's losing sales as people are walking past. But that got her some socialization and got her exercise walking around. Otherwise, she'd sit in front of the TV.
How long did
And the
she?
same thing. Pardon me?
How long was she able to work before she was forced to give up the job?
She worked till age 65. And that was our plan all along, that she worked to 65. And then my plan was to work till 60, which I almost did, so that we'd split the difference and then be able to enjoy some retirement together. Enjoying the retirement together didn't really work out the way we planned, because little by little, like I said, all the things that we enjoyed doing got chipped away. Eventually, when she went to memory care in 2023, and she was there just about 13 months, I'd take her for walks outside, and we walked down to a park about a full circle is maybe a half a mile. Eventually, she couldn't do that, so we just walked to a gazebo at the next building. And then eventually she couldn't walk anymore, and she was in a wheelchair, and I'd take her out with the wheelchair, and she was always cold. She was a very thin person, and she just got very thin, and there was nothing left to her before she died.
So it sounds like it had quite an impact on your lifestyle as a couple.
It did. And that was like, I was mourning the loss of all these activities that we used to be able to do. So people think, you must be doing a lot of mourning now. And I do, but I think there was mourning going on for years,
right,
as our life slipped away too. And the woman I knew, the woman I married, slipped away, and it wasn't the same person anymore. There's a good book written by former Wisconsin Governor Marty Schreiber called My Two Elaines, about his wife with dementia. And he said, you got to realize that your significant other is no longer the same person that person used to be. And if you accept that, it's easier to deal with.
I've heard from a lot of people who have been through similar situations that they had been mourning their spouse for a decade before he or she actually died. And when he or she died, then they felt relief in some regard that they no longer had to be a caretaker, and that then they were overwhelmed by guilt over those feelings. That has to be hard for a caretaker like you.
Yeah, there is guilt that you feel a sense of relief. Like, putting her in memory care was, I thought, going to be one of the worst days of my life. And in one aspect it was, but in the other aspect, I didn't walk out of there crying. I walked away with this great sense of relief, because incontinence issues had started, and she was at the point where she wasn't bathing anymore, and she wasn't changing clothes, and she was soiling herself, and not even, she'd argue with me about bathing or changing clothes. It was an argument all the time. And looking back now, the anger that I showed with her is one of my great regrets. You think, how could you be angry at someone who can't help themselves? But when you live in it 24/7,
you get to a point where you snap.
And I did too many times, and I feel guilty about that too.
Okay. But this whole process after her death gave you a new sense of purpose for your life.
It did. As she was going downhill, I knew that I needed some self-care. And that was another thing that I drew from Marty Schreiber's book, My Two Elaines. And so I built what I consider 4 pillars of things that helped me through it. One was that we didn't have many friends in town, and the ones that were around, we didn't have many family in town. And the relatives who were in town really weren't that helpful. And so I built this network of support with former coworkers, with friends and neighbors, and they were godsends at the right times. And I also continued bicycling when Cheryl went to memory care. I had some friends that bicycled, and one of the guys said, Greg, you should join us on these road bike trips. And so he helped me find a road bike used. So I was spending a lot of money on memory care, so I couldn't buy a brand new road bike. So we found a used one at a reasonable price. And in 2023, I bicycled 1,700 miles.
Wow.
And last year, Cheryl died in February of last year. And last year, I bicycled 4,100 miles. So I continued to bicycle even after she died. It was just it was like a runner's high. Mm-hmm. And even today, like, I feel like a caged lion if I can't get out at least 2, if not 3 times a week. It gives me a relief valve. Another thing I did was I kept a journal for 10 years. And as a writer, this was a natural part of of who I am. And it was almost like a diary. And I didn't write in it every day or even every week, but when something significant happened, when she just showed another odd lapse of memory or judgment, and I wrote it down, and it was a way to process what was happening and to vent and just release that anger. And then the fourth thing I did was I always loved nature, and I always loved the photography. And so by 2018, Cheryl wasn't thinking to buy me Christmas presents anymore. So I bought myself a Christmas present. I bought this little camera with a little zoom lens that sticks out about 3 inches. It's a Sony, and I could put it in a little pouch and keep it on my belt. So if I went bicycling or we did a little hike or a walk the dog, I could carry it with me. And I started taking pictures in the city of Janesville. And as a relief valve from Cheryl, she was very comfortable in our home. She owned the home before we got married, and she wasn't wandering at first. So I just said, honey, I'm going to go to a park for an hour and photograph birds. Do you mind? She'd go, no, go ahead. And of course, she'd just sit and watch TV. But I got away and I started getting pictures of all these different birds, and I started categorizing them in my computer. And when she died, I had maybe 85 or 90 species in the city of Janesville.
Wow.
And I've continued that. And right now I have 104. In fact, just 2 days ago, I gave a talk at a retirement center here. There were like 60 people there, and people just loved the talk. I explained how this hobby came about and where I go to find birds and the camera I use and how I feed backyard birds and things like that. It went over very well. So that's something that just continued too.
I love that you do that because it allowed you to find beauty in what was a very dark period of your time.
Another thing too was I read this book by a guy I met in Wisconsin Writers Association, and he died years ago. But it was called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Dementia Ward. I can't remember what he did for a living, but when he retired, he started working in a dementia ward, and he went back and he got like a nurse's aide degree. And he wrote the funny things that happened. There's a lot of sad things that happen too as people get worse and eventually die. And he changed the names, but he wrote about the funny things that happened. And there were funny things that happened. The first time I went to visit Cheryl at this memory care facility in Janesville, we were sitting there on a little love seat in front of a gas fireplace. And this woman with a rolling walker came up behind us, and I could hear her walking behind us. And all of a sudden, this other lady goes, oh, you dropped something. I thought maybe she dropped a pencil or something. And also, I turned around to help her. She dropped her pants. Like, oh my God, I turned away. And then the other woman came up and, let me help you. And they started squabbling, like calling each other a jerk and stuff like that. And I said to Cheryl, I said, ooh, people get a little testy around here. And she goes, I never heard that before. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. She just doesn't remember it because as soon as it happened, it's out of her mind. But stuff like that happened. And one time she fell and hit her head, split her head open on a corner of a end table by the bed. Ended up going by ambulance to the doctor. And it was a pretty clean cut, and they just was able to tape it up, and there was blood all over because it was a head wound. So it looked worse than it was. And she came back, and I drove her back to the memory care unit, and we get out of the car, and I said, okay, here, honey, here we go. And she starts dancing. She goes, we're off to see the wizard. It just cracked me up. And she went to an ambulance to the hospital, and now she's singing away and dancing. And
those are fun memories to keep because it reminds you of what she used to be back when she was fully cognitive, etc. I know a friend of mine just lost her husband to dementia last year, and he was a smoker, and she caught him vaping their remote control of the TV and couldn't help but laugh. And it helps to have those tension breaking moments. It just gives you a little bit relief and helps you find joy on that area where you can be depressed all the time if you dwell on it. Super. So you started biking and photography to take care of yourself. And at what point did you have to give that up because she required round-the-clock care?
Like I said, when she was still living with me, when I'd go bicycling, we'd go on this tandem bicycle.
That's brilliant.
And late, she didn't start wandering until just a few months before I put her in memory care. In fact, The only sign she ever showed of wandering was we went to New Orleans with a couple of my high school friends in September of 2022. This was just a few months before she entered memory care. And we were staying at a place right near Jackson Square down in the heart of New Orleans. And one night I got up to use the bathroom and she wasn't in bed and she wasn't in the room. I'm thinking, oh my God. And fortunately, we'd booked a place that had an interior courtyard. And I went and looked in the courtyard. She wasn't there. And there was a pool and there was a little gated fence around the pool. And she wasn't in the pool. And I quick ran into the lobby and I was glad to see it was staffed overnight. And you couldn't really get to the street without going through the lobby. And I asked the woman if she'd seen a woman in her pajamas. And the clerk said, no, I haven't. And I raced all the way back through the courtyard. And there's a group of women there having a drink, like it's probably 3 a.m. They probably just got back from celebrating at the bars. And I said, did you see a woman in their pajamas? And they go, no. And this one woman says, does she have dementia? And I said, yes. And she jumped up to help. So I'm circling back and forth looking. I looked in the room again and I went back into the lobby and there was a security guard by the underground parking lot. And he was looking and he said he went out on the street and didn't see anything. And I went out there and looked. And then I came back into the courtyard, and here comes that woman that had jumped up to help, walking hand in hand with Cheryl. She'd gone up to the second floor for some reason, and of course she had no knowledge of why she went up there, how long she'd been gone, and why she left the room. The problem was there's no like security chain on the door. Although I'm a light sleeper, I would have heard that. But then I piled our suitcases and some chairs in front of the door so she wouldn't do it a second.
No kidding.
She did that. And then one time in January that year, just a few weeks before she went to memory care, I took a shower in our basement and I came upstairs and she had her coat on. I go, honey, where are you going? She says, oh, I thought I'd go for a walk and get us something to eat. And I said, honey, I'm going to make us big salads like I said I was going to. She goes, oh, I don't want your old supper. I said, honey, I make you supper every day. Just let me get dressed quick and I'll make supper. And so I ran upstairs, got dressed, came back down, and now she's out in the driveway. And it was like 0 night. It was really cold. I said, honey, where are you going? She goes, I don't know. I go, it's really cold outside. Why don't you come back inside? Oh, I guess you're right, she says. So she came back in. Those were really the only 2 incidents of wandering she showed, but you could tell we were getting into that situation at that point.
That's got to be scary to think that she could get up and wander away in the middle of the night and not be detected, and Lord knows where she would go. Yeah. Do you have any plans to turn your journals into a book at any point?
I've been working on it. Like the journal itself, when I stopped writing it a couple months after Cheryl died, was 350,000 words. So it was huge. And it had probably 15 or 20 side stories and little poetry kind of things, and just of things that happened. For instance, she lost her purse on a Labor Day weekend, and we spent all day looking for it and found it in Muscadet, where our river property was, because we'd gone to lunch at a place in town that day, and I didn't pay attention that she had her purse along, and she left it there. So we spent all day trying to find it. So I wrote that as a whole separate story. One time we were bicycling around Lake Monona in Madison, and I stopped to take a picture, and I looked up, and she's gone. I thought she just kept pedaling because she would go for a hike and I'd stop to take a picture. She'd just keep walking. And I'd try to keep an eye on her before she got too far ahead. So I thought she was ahead of me. Turns out she was actually behind me. And by the time I lost her, she pedaled all the way back. We'd gone about 2/3 of the way around already. She pedaled all the way back. I didn't think she'd remember where we parked the car, but somehow she did. Oh, she was mad. So anyway, I wrote that as a separate story too, those kinds of things. So I started putting these together in a chronological order and then winnowing it down, and I had about 150,000 words. And then I narrowed it down to 135,000 in September. And then early this month, I went to a writers' conference and talked to a publisher there, and he said, you know, it's still long. If you get it under 100,000 words, I think we could do business. But any bigger than that, and it'd just be too big it'd be too expensive to make a book out of it. Sure. It would have any marketability. So that's probably a goal yet. I don't know if I can get it down that far and be true to the story, but it's a goal I have. In the meantime, I've been writing weekly Substack columns, and that started. I used to blog when I was with the Janesville Gazette, And so a couple weeks after Cheryl died, there was a library program about blogging. And I went to it, and the guy said, if you're just writing a general blog, you're not going to have any readers. You got to find your niche. You liken it to like, he said, there's all kinds of black and white cows in the field. Find your purple cow. And he said that, I thought, I just became a widower. From the viewpoint of being a widower, I think maybe I could develop a niche. And so I've been writing those on Substack for 79 straight weeks now.
Wow.
Every Tuesday, post a new one. And in fact, I have one ready to go for next Tuesday already. And they reflect on things that happened in our life and things that happen in my mourning process. A lot of times I'll go back to the journal and extract some thoughts and some key points about something that happened. And just like bicycling, and I talked about this fact that I lost her on that bike trip around there, and how bicycling just continues to help me in my mourning process and moving forward with life.
I would imagine that many people would find that encouraging to learn what your perspective would be as a single man, now widowed, and how you perceive life from those eyes.
And I think it has helped me, and I've gotten really nice comments on it. I'm stuck at 250 followers. I hope that, like, it would spread around the country and even around the world by people who somehow find out about it, like even like through this podcast and about it and pick it up. And then they tell other people who are in the same kind of caregiving situation or mourning process. And then it would spread like roots on a tree. It hasn't done that yet. I guess a guy can remain optimistic that it will.
I'm sure it will.
I started doing this to show a potential publisher that there is an audience for this type of writing that I have in the journal.
Okay. And so there might be a publisher interested in doing that. If you can get the wording down to 100,000, would that include the new Substack columns, or would this just be from the journal?
No, the Substack columns wouldn't be part of it. But like I said, the Substack columns do take excerpts from some parts of the journal and talk about different things. Even a friend of mine was having trouble with driving. And eventually he agreed to give up driving, and his wife does all the driving now. And that reminded me of when I had to get Cheryl away from being behind the car because she didn't even know where she was going anymore. It's a big risk. And I know some families have a real problem getting that loved one to give up the keys. In my case, while Cheryl kept misplacing her purse, she kept the keys in her purse. So I just hid her purse. And I said, honey, you don't need your purse. I got some money if you want to buy something. And so it's pretty easy. She thought she still drove. I could never sell her car until she moved to Medicare because she thought she still drove it, but she never did.
I know.
If drove it, once in a while a car needs driving. Honey, we're going to take your car. Why? To be driven once in a while. Oh, that's a bunch of baloney, she'll say.
I know that.
Well, it wasn't a bunch of baloney. She just didn't drive it anymore.
I know.
It's like that.
I know one family struggled with that, and what they did is they took his keys and then had copies made, but the keys wouldn't work. So he was allowed to retain his keys, which gave him the belief that he was still in control of that, but he could never do anything with it. And I thought that was a really good, smart idea.
It would be a good idea, yeah. Unless the guy didn't get too angry about it. A guy I know that this guy was married to one of Cheryl's first cousins who died of dementia. And I told him about this situation where I kept maintaining Cheryl's car and it was getting expensive and we didn't need two cars. He goes, just tell her you took it to the shop and the repairs are delayed because they can't get the part and eventually forget about the car. And I thought might work, but then of course her name was on the title of the car too. So it was like, that would be a problem too, just trying to sell it out from under her.
Do you have any tips for people who might be encountering the same situation and need some help navigating through it or beyond it if their spouse had died?
Sure. Like I said, build a support group, whether it's family, friends, former coworkers, people at church, neighbors. And there are going to be people who you think you can count on, but you can't. And you might never learn the reason. We had people who we couldn't count on because a divorce or an illness or indifference, or they just couldn't see Cheryl go downhill anymore.
Patience would be a big thing too, I would imagine.
Right. let those people go. If they can't do it, don't be angry with them. Don't even spend your time thinking about them because you got too much to do as a caregiver.
Right.
Instead, nurture the people who are supportive of you. That's one big thing. Another thing is join a support group. I was in a small support group, and it was very helpful. In fact, my Substack column that released this week was about a woman who was part of our small support group whose husband died a few years ago, and now she died. And I just reflected on her life and how the support group helped us both.
I would think that would be excellent because they understand what you're going through. You talk to your regular friends who've never been through that, and they can't really understand what it is, and they might have well-meaning advice. But
Right.
having that support group of people who've been there, done that, has got to be essential to get through it.
And it was a way to get advice and to vent.
Right.
There was a woman in our support group who said her husband, who had dementia, got so defiant and angry at her daughter that her daughter moved out. So now she was going to be stuck. The wife was going to be stuck with all the caregiving again. And she was so angry about it. She said, because he threatened her, he threatened the daughter. And she goes, if he ever threatens me, I'm going to hit him with a frying pan. And it said, please don't hit him with a frying pan. He's older than you. You're probably going to outlive him. You don't want to end up in prison.
Right.
When he's gone, you want to be able to enjoy life. Things like that. But another thing I realize is that living with a person with dementia is all about adapting. For instance, Cheryl wouldn't change clothes. So when she went to bed, she'd been wearing her same clothes for 2 or 3 days. I just threw them in the hamper. And then she'd look for different clothes in the morning.
That's smart.
She wouldn't pack anymore, probably because the process was overwhelming for her, even when we went up to see my mom up northern Wisconsin. So I started packing for her and making sure she had warm clothes and boots in the car if need be for wintertime. She kept losing her pill dispenser. So eventually I glued it to a strip of board and attached a little chain to that board and screwed it into the bathroom wall. So she couldn't take it off the counter. That worked until she pulled it out of the wall one day.
Oh, no.
The same thing, she kept losing the TV remote, so I chained that to the bottom of the coffee table. She wouldn't wash her hair anymore at one point. So the only way I could get her to wash her hair was to make an appointment with her hairdresser just to wash her hair, not to cut it. And so that worked months before she went to memory care. Just look for ways. Another one was she kept losing a dog's leash. And I kept buying more leashes. Like, where did these dog leashes go? We had 6 of them at one time. And then I realized if we get home from a dog walk and we were walking together because I didn't trust her to walk by herself anymore and maybe get lost, if I stuck the dog leash in my coat pocket, I'll know where it is, but she won't think to look there. So that's how I solved that problem. It's just finding a way to adapt, to adjust to the new reality you're living with.
I would imagine a support group would be helpful in that regard too, because what worked for them might work for you too.
Exactly. Yeah. You find ways to share advice that helps you. And sometimes your situation is different, so it doesn't work out, but sometimes you're going to find a good idea.
What have you done to move on with your life?
Like I said, I continue to take bird photos, continue to bicycle, and continue to do my writing. But I also met a younger gal. In fact, she had met Cheryl. This woman works at the Janesville Farmers Market. So we had met her because we always went to the farmers market. And a few months after Cheryl died, there was a program at the library about bird watching. And I asked her if she'd like to go with me, and she said, sure. And then we went to a couple of different things together, and I said, okay, let's just step back. What are we doing? Are we developing a friendship or a romantic relationship? And she goes, just a friendship. She says, I'm done with dating. She'd never been married, never had kids. She goes, I've had some bad experiences. I don't want to date anymore. And I said, that's fine. I just enjoy hanging out and doing things with you. So that went on a few more months, and then all of a sudden things changed. And now we're a couple. And so it's working out real well.
That's wonderful. Did you get any resistance from others about starting a new relationship after the death of your first wife?
From my mom, yeah. She thought a little too soon, but some other people, some of my supportive friends are like, Craig, life's too short.
Precisely.
You've been mourning for years.
Exactly.
Oh.
That's right. The mourning period extended years before she actually died.
And they said, if it works for you and it works for her, more power to you. Go for it. So
The kids were okay?
Yeah, her kids haven't stayed in touch that much. One of them was estranged most of the time, so I don't hear from much. And then the other one went through a divorce. They really haven't stayed in touch that much. The ball's in their court. I'm open to staying in touch, but if they don't want to, they don't live in town. So one lives in Kenosha and one lives in Illinois.
But your kids were okay with you moving on?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I only have one son. He lives in Janesville here.
Okay. Super.
Yeah, and he, I think he connected well with Jennifer. That's her name, and so, yeah, it's been working out great. So
That's neat.
And,
Yeah. So
and she one of the things about Jennifer was she was always empathetic, and that's really how we connected. Was she showed empathy about what I was dealing with Cheryl, and even like when I write these Substack columns, I share them with her before I write it or before I post it. And she's always okay with it. She's just understanding and supportive. And likewise, she has things going on in her life that I'm supportive of. And that's really what our whole relationship was built on, was mutual support.
That's right. And that's a good thing because you had envisioned a life with your wife into retirement that obviously didn't turn out the way that you had thought of for decades. And
Right.
When that ended, you're still young enough that you can enjoy those things that you've always wanted to do when you find a great partner who also wants to do those things and learn about them. So cool. Where can people find your Substack account?
Well, if they just like Google Substack and Greg Peck, they'll find me. And all I have to do is plug in their email address, and then they'll get an alert every time I post a new one.
Okay.
Or they can reach out to me on Facebook Messenger. I'm on Facebook a lot. I have about 500 Facebook friends because I'm very well known in Janesville, having been a journalist in Janesville and in the Writers Association of Wisconsin. And so I have a lot of Facebook friends, and so I'm on there a lot. So if you message me on Facebook, you reach out and I can help you connect into Substack if you have a problem with that. Or if you just want to reach out and ask me about other things too.
Sure.
I've written 3 books through my career, 3 nonfiction books. And if you're interested in reading those, I can mail signed copies to you. One is called Death Beyond the Willows. It's a true story of a 1927 wedding date tragedy that happened to a couple that were married in my hometown of Marshall. And then there's one called Memories of Marshall. It's about the ups and downs of growing up in a small town. It's a memoir. And I've donated all profits to the Marshall Area Historical Society from that one.
That's nice.
And I've donated over $5,000 to them so far through the profits of that book.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 years ago, I put out a book called Snakes, Squirrels, and Bears, Oh My. And it's about finding humor amid life's frustrations. Little short nonfiction stories about something that's frustrating in life or an incident that frustrates you. And then you find the humor in the situation.
Excellent. We'll be sure to link to that in the show notes. But
Yeah, okay.
thank you so much for sharing your story with me today. I really appreciate it. That's got to be a hard experience to go through, treating a spouse with dementia and having to see him or her fade away at a time when you're still young enough to really want to get out and enjoy life. And then to have to deal with all the grief and the guilt that surrounds that. And I really appreciate you sharing your story with other people because I know there are thousands of them who are going through that same journey who will find hope and encouragement just knowing you've been there and been through it.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate that.
Greg Peck's story is a good reminder that meaning and purpose can grow even in seasons of loss. Caring for his wife taught Greg to adapt, stay patient, and build a strong support network. After Cheryl's passing, Greg continued cycling thousands of miles, photographing birds along his travels, and writing as a form of healing. He also found companionship again and is embracing a new chapter with gratitude and optimism. Greg finds purpose today by supporting others who are navigating their own caregiving or grief journeys. Through his Substack writing, community talks, and ongoing work on his memoir, he offers encouragement, perspective, and hope to families walking along a similar path. If you'd like to connect with Greg, you can find his writing on Substack by searching for Greg Peck. He is also active on Facebook and welcomes messages through Facebook Messenger from anyone who'd like to reach out, ask questions, or learn more about his work. Greg's books, Death Beyond the Willows, Memories of Marshall, and Snakes, Squirrels, and Bears, Oh My! Finding Humor Amid Life's Frustrations are available on Amazon and in other bookstores. That's all for this week's show. If you'd like to start living a more meaningful life, I encourage you to download our free guide to finding purpose, which is available at www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thank you for listening, and if you like the show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.